I stood frozen at the edge of my backyard, my heart pounding in my chest. My pool, the one I had spent months saving up for, the one that was supposed to be my personal paradise, was gone. In its place was a solid slab of gray cement, rough and uneven, completely sealing what was once a sparkling blue oasis. At first, I thought it was some kind of cruel prank. Maybe construction workers had made a mistake. Maybe I was dreaming. But then, my eyes landed on something even more infuriating. A brightly colored HOA notice pinned to my back door. As I ripped it off, my hands shaking with rage, my mind raced. Did they seriously approve this? Who in their right mind would fill someone's pool with cement? And then it hit me. Karen, the self-appointed queen of our HOA. The woman who had made my life a living hell ever since I moved in. But here's the thing. What she didn't know, what she never even considered, was that she had just committed a felony. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. When I first moved into this neighborhood, I thought I had hit the jackpot. The houses were beautiful, the streets were clean, and everything looked like one of those perfect suburban communities you see in real estate commercials. I imagined friendly neighbors, block parties, and peaceful evenings in my backyard, just enjoying my space. I was so wrong. Because what I didn't realize was that lurking beneath that picture-perfect exterior was an HOA from hell. And at the center of it all was Karen. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the self-appointed dictator of our HOA. Technically, she was just a board member, but you wouldn't know that by the way she acted. She treated the entire neighborhood like it was her personal kingdom, and she was the queen. And if you dared to cross her, oh, you were in for a world of passive-aggressive letters, ridiculous fines, and constant harassment. At first, I didn't take her seriously. I mean, how bad could one entitled HOA lady really be? I was about to find out. It started small. Within days of moving in, I got my first violation notice. My crime? Parking my truck in my own driveway. Apparently, it was unsightly and did not align with the aesthetics of the community. I laughed it off. Maybe Karen was just a little overzealous, right? I moved the truck into my garage and figured that would be the end of it. Nope, that was just her testing the waters. Then came the letters. Every week, like clockwork, I'd get a new complaint. My trash cans were out too early. My lawn was too long. Mind you, it was cut 2 days prior. My porch light was too bright. My mailbox was too modern and didn't match the approved designs. It was nonstop. I started to wonder if this woman had a hidden camera pointed directly at my house, because there was no way someone could be this obsessive unless they were watching me. It wasn't just me either. Every single new homeowner had their own Karen horror story. She especially had it out for people who didn't bow to her authority. If you didn't follow her exact rules, if you even questioned one of her complaints, she would make your life miserable. One neighbor painted his shutters a slightly different shade of blue than what was approved, and Karen hit him with daily fines until he repainted them. Another woman put out a small garden gnome, just one little decoration in her flower bed, and Karen threatened her with legal action if she didn't remove it. This was the kind of person we were dealing with. Now, I'll admit, at first, I tried to keep the peace. I figured, hey, maybe if I just follow the rules, she'll leave me alone. Spoiler alert, she didn't. In fact, the more I complied, the more she seemed to target me. It was like she was looking for a fight, and since I wasn't giving her one, she was going to keep pushing until I snapped. Then came the pool renovation. This was the moment everything escalated from annoying HOA pettiness to full-blown insanity. See, my house came with an older pool that needed some serious work. It was functional, but the tiles were cracked, the filter system was outdated, and honestly, I wanted to make it my own. I had big plans. New tile, better lighting, a sleek modern design that would turn my backyard into a personal paradise. And according to the HOA's own guidelines, I was well within my rights to renovate. I submitted my request, filled out all the paperwork, and even got official approval from the HOA. That should have been the end of it. But Karen? Oh no, Karen wasn't having it. The moment she found out about my renovation, she lost her mind. She started showing up at my house unannounced, asking questions like, "Are you sure this is allowed?" And, "Did you even get permission for this?" As if she wasn't literally on the board that had signed off on it. Then came the delay tactics. She started claiming my paperwork was missing signatures. It wasn't. Then she said the renovation violated some imaginary rule that didn't exist. I had to fight her every step of the way, but in the end, she couldn't actually stop the renovation from happening, and that made her furious. I could see it in her eyes every time she passed my house. This barely contained rage, like she was just waiting for her moment to strike. My neighbors even started warning me. "Karen's not going to let this go," they'd say. "Watch your back." And then, weird things started happening. First, my construction crew started getting anonymous complaints. Someone, gee, I wonder who, kept calling and reporting violations, trying to shut down the renovation. Of course, nothing came of it because I was following all the rules, but it was clear Karen was on a mission. Then, one morning, I woke up to find a stop work order on my front door. Apparently, my project was suspended pending further HOA review. But when I called the HOA office, they had no idea what I was talking about. Turns out, Karen had taken it upon herself to forge an official-looking letter in an attempt to halt my renovation. At this point, I knew she was unhinged, but even I didn't realize how far she was willing to go. Because while I was dealing with her petty, passive-aggressive nonsense, she was planning something much worse. Something that would take months to fix. Something that would cost thousands of dollars in damage. Something that was completely illegal. And I had no idea what was coming. I should have known something was wrong the moment my contractors called me in a panic. It was early in the morning, and I was just getting ready for the day when my phone rang. The foreman's voice was tense, almost frantic. "You got to get here, now." That was all he said before hanging up. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to expect, but I had a feeling Karen was somehow involved. I grabbed my keys and rushed outside, heart pounding. When I got to my backyard, I stopped dead in my tracks. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My pool, the one I had been spending weeks renovating, was completely filled with cement. Not just a little, not a small section, the entire thing. A thick, rough, uneven slab of gray stretched from one end of the pool to the other. It was as if someone had poured an entire truckload of concrete into it and just walked away. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My mind couldn't even process what I was looking at. The workers stood around in stunned silence, some shaking their heads, others whispering to each other in disbelief. "This had to have happened overnight," one of them muttered. "No way this was an accident." Another guy kicked at the dried cement and let out a low whistle. "Damn, whoever did this really wanted to make sure it wasn't coming out." I stepped forward, my hands shaking with rage. This wasn't just vandalism. This wasn't just some prank. This was intentional. This was done by someone who wanted to destroy my property and make sure it would be nearly impossible to fix. And there was only one person who would go to these lengths: Karen. But even as my blood boiled, I knew I needed proof. If I just accused her outright, without evidence, she'd find a way to wiggle out of it. She always did. So instead of losing my mind right there, I forced myself to think. I needed to find out how she did it. I needed to know who helped her. I needed to catch her red-handed. I called the police immediately. But I already knew how that was going to go. This was an HOA neighborhood, and HOA disputes were usually treated as civil matters. Still, I had to try. While I was waiting for them to show up, I started asking my crew if they noticed anything unusual. That's when one of the younger workers spoke up hesitantly. "Actually, I did see a cement truck last night." My head snapped toward him. "What?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I was driving home late, around midnight, and I saw a cement truck parked near the entrance of the neighborhood. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, I mean, how often do you see a cement truck just sitting around at that hour?" That was it. That was my lead. I pulled up my home security app on my phone and started scrubbing through the footage from last night. It didn't take long before I saw exactly what I was looking for. At 1:47 a.m., a cement truck backed into my driveway. A few minutes later, two figures, one short and stocky, the other tall and thin, stepped out and walked toward my backyard. One of them had Karen's unmistakable blonde bob. I stared at the screen in disbelief. She actually did it. She actually broke into my property and destroyed my pool. And the best part? I had it all on video. The police arrived shortly after, and I wasted no time showing them the footage. The officers exchanged glances, and I could tell they weren't expecting such clear-cut evidence. One of them sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Well, that's definitely criminal damage." The other nodded. "Yeah, this isn't just an HOA issue anymore. This is felony-level vandalism." I could have laughed if I weren't so furious. Karen, the woman who constantly acted like she was above the law, who wielded her HOA status like a weapon, had just committed a crime right on camera, and she had no idea that I was about to use it against her. The police wasted no time heading over to Karen's house. I followed, staying just far enough behind so I could watch the show. When they knocked on her door, it took a few minutes before she finally answered. And the moment she saw the officers, her expression twisted into something between fake innocence and barely concealed annoyance. "Is there a problem, officers?" she asked, crossing her arms. One of the cops didn't even hesitate. "Karen, we need to talk about the cement truck that was on your neighbor's property last night." For a split second, I saw it. The flash of panic in her eyes. It was quick, barely noticeable, but it was there. She recovered fast, though, and let out a scoffing laugh. I have no idea what you're talking about. The officer wasn't buying it. We have security footage showing you and another individual trespassing on his property. The pool was illegally filled with cement. This is a felony offense. Now she looked outright offended. Felony? Oh, please. That's ridiculous. I am the HOA board president, and I was simply enforcing community standards. That pool was an unauthorized construction. I was ensuring compliance. My jaw nearly dropped. Was this woman serious? Was she really trying to justify filling my pool with cement? But before I could say anything, the officer cut her off. The pool renovation was approved by the HOA. You had no authority to take any action against it, and certainly not like this. Karen's face turned red. She was cornered, and she knew it. Well, I had complaints. Other neighbors didn't want the pool there. It was an eyesore. I was doing what was best for the community. The cop shook his head. Karen, you and your accomplice are looking at charges of trespassing, vandalism, and destruction of property. That was the moment it finally hit her. She opened her mouth like she was going to argue, but then shut it again. The reality of the situation was sinking in. She wasn't just facing some petty HOA dispute. She was facing actual legal consequences. I could see the gears turning in her head, her mind racing for an escape route. But there wasn't one. Not this time. The officer pulled out a small notepad. We'll be in contact with the district attorney. In the meantime, I'd suggest you get a lawyer. Karen looked like she wanted to scream. Instead, she slammed the door in their faces. Typical. But it didn't matter. Because now, this was no longer her game. Now, it was mine. I wasn't just going to let her walk away from this. Oh no. Karen had spent years terrorizing this neighborhood, thinking she was untouchable. But now, she had finally gone too far, and I was about to make sure she paid for every last thing she had done. And the best part? This was only the beginning. The moment Karen slammed her door, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Sure, the cops had confronted her, and sure, they had confirmed that this was felony-level vandalism. But knowing Karen, she wasn't going to just roll over and take the consequences. She was going to lie, manipulate, twist the story however she could to weasel her way out of it. And that's exactly why I needed to build an airtight case against her. I spent the next few hours gathering every single piece of evidence I could. Security footage? Check. Screenshots of every email, text, and HOA notice she had ever sent me regarding the pool? Check. Witness statements? I had some, but I needed more. I wasn't going to let her pull some nonsense excuse like it was an accident or a misunderstanding. No, I was going to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that she did this on purpose. So I started knocking on doors. At first, most of my neighbors were hesitant. Karen had ruled this neighborhood with an iron fist for years, and people were afraid of her. She had a habit of making life miserable for anyone who dared to cross her. Extra HOA fines, mysterious complaints, reports to city inspectors. She had weapons, and everyone knew it. But the moment I told them what she had done to my pool, that fear started to crack. Mrs. Thompson, the sweet old lady who lived 3 houses down, was the first to break. I saw the truck, she admitted in a hushed voice, glancing over her shoulder like Karen might materialize out of thin air. It was around 2 in the morning. I thought it was strange, but I didn't think to say anything at the time. That was huge. She had seen the truck. That meant I had another witness placing the cement truck at my house in the middle of the night. Then, Mr. Patel, the guy who lived across the street, stepped forward. I didn't see it happen, he admitted, but I heard voices, arguing. A woman, Karen, I think, was yelling at someone. I leaned in. Did you hear what she was saying? He nodded. Something about making sure it's done right, and he'll learn his lesson. That was it. That was the smoking gun. Not only did I have footage of her physically being there, but now I had a witness who had heard her literally admitting that this was some kind of revenge. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to know who helped her. There was no way Karen did this alone. She might be insane, but she wasn't physically hauling tons of cement by herself. Someone drove that truck. Someone poured that cement. Someone else was involved. And that's when I remembered something. The second figure in the security footage, the one with Karen, the shorter, stockier guy. I had barely paid attention to him before because Karen was the obvious villain here. But now he was the key to everything. So I took another look at the footage. I zoomed in, enhanced as much as I could, trying to get a clear look at his face. And when I finally did, my blood ran cold. I knew exactly who he was. Bob. Bob was Karen's nephew, a total deadbeat who had bounced from job to job, never staying in one place for long. He had been in and out of trouble for years, minor stuff mostly, but enough that everyone in the neighborhood knew he was bad news. And now, it looked like Karen had roped him into her little revenge scheme. Now, I had everything. Security footage? Check. Witnesses? Check. Karen caught admitting her motives? Check. And now, I had the identity of her accomplice. It was time to take this to the police. I marched right back to the station, this time with a folder full of neatly organized evidence. The officer at the front desk barely had time to ask what I needed before I dropped it onto the counter. I want to file an official report. Criminal trespassing, vandalism, felony property destruction. I paused, then added, and conspiracy. The officer raised an eyebrow but took the folder and started flipping through it. As he scanned the documents, his expression shifted from mild curiosity to absolute seriousness. "This is a lot," he admitted. "This is actually really strong evidence." "I know," I said flatly. "That's why I'm here." Another officer joined him, glancing over his shoulder at the footage on my phone. "Wait, is that Karen?" "Yup." "And is that Bob?" "Sure is." That was all they needed. Within minutes, they were making calls, filing reports, escalating things. This wasn't just some HOA dispute anymore. This wasn't going to be handled internally. This was official police business now. And the best part, Karen had no idea what was coming. The moment I walked out of the police station, I knew one thing for certain. Karen had no idea what was about to hit her. I had built my case so perfectly that there was no way she could worm her way out of it. She had trespassed, committed felony-level vandalism, and been caught red-handed. The evidence was overwhelming. She was done. But before the police could do their part, I needed mine. I wanted to see her face when she realized just how deep of a hole she had dug for herself. I wanted to watch that smug superiority crumble when she realized that, this time, she wasn't the one in control. So, I did the one thing that would guarantee a reaction. I went straight to her house. The walk up to her porch felt surreal. This was the same house where she had issued dozens of ridiculous HOA fines. The same house where she had schemed and plotted against anyone who dared defy her. But today, the tables had turned. I knocked loudly. At first, there was silence. Then, the sound of movement inside. The door swung open, and there she was, Karen. Arms crossed, a look of annoyed superiority plastered across her face, like she was already preparing to scold me for daring to exist on her doorstep. "What do you want?" she snapped. I smiled. She had no idea. "Just thought you should know," I said, leaning casually against the doorframe, "that the police have everything. Security footage, witnesses, a full report. They know exactly what you did." For the first time ever, I saw it. Fear. It was just a flicker, a brief, almost imperceptible shift in her expression. But it was there. She tried to recover, scoffing dramatically. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone, pressed play, and turned the screen toward her. The grainy security footage played in her full view. Karen, Bob, the cement truck, the timestamp, proving she was on my property in the dead of night. She paled. You can't prove that's me," she tried, but her voice wavered. "Oh, but I can." And I did. "And the police agree," I said moodily. "They'll be paying you a visit real soon, Karen, but I thought I'd give you the courtesy of hearing it from me first. You know, as a good neighbor and all." That's when she lost it. "You can't do this to me," she shrieked, her face twisting into pure rage. "I was doing the neighborhood a favor. Your filthy pool was a health hazard." I blinked. "Health hazard? Really? That's the best excuse you can come up with?" "It was against HOA rules," she screeched. "You were supposed to take it down." I grinned. "That's funny." Because I checked. And nowhere in the HOA bylaws does it say I can't have a pool. In fact, it specifically states that modifications within personal property lines are permitted. I leaned in slightly. "So what that means, Karen, is that you just admitted to destroying my property for no reason. And guess what? That makes it a felony." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Checkmate. For a split second, she looked like she was about to lunge at me, but then, police sirens. Her head snapped toward the street as 2 squad cars rolled up. Officers stepped out. One of them the same officer I had spoken to at the station. His gaze landed on Karen, then on me. "Is this her?" he asked. I nodded. "Yup, Karen Green," the officer said, pulling out a small notepad. Karen took a step back. This is ridiculous. This is harassment." The officer ignored her, flipping through his notes. "We have security footage of you trespassing on private property, engaging in felony vandalism, and conspiring to commit property destruction. We also have multiple witness statements placing you at the scene." He looked up. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Karen was spiraling. "You can't do this. It was a community service. I didn't do anything wrong." "Ma'am," the officer interrupted, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You are under arrest for criminal trespassing and felony property damage. You have the right to remain silent." "No," she screamed. "You can't arrest me. I'm the head of the HOA." But it didn't matter. The moment the officer grabbed her wrist and clicked the first cuff into place, she knew this wasn't some HOA power struggle she could manipulate her way out of. This wasn't a fine she could issue or a complaint she could file. This was real. As they escorted her to the squad car, she turned back, her face a mask of desperation. "I'll sue you. You'll regret this." I smiled and waved. "Good luck with that." The door slammed shut. The car pulled away. And just like that, Karen was gone. For the first time in years, the neighborhood was free. The silence that followed Karen's arrest was almost eerie. For years, this woman had made it her personal mission to terrorize the neighborhood, wielding her HOA status like a weapon, issuing fines, enforcing ridiculous rules, and making life miserable for anyone who dared to stand up to her. And now, she was gone, just like that. But the story wasn't over yet, because as much as Karen liked to act like she was above the law, the reality was far worse than I had even imagined. The felony charges she was facing weren't just some slap-on-the-wrist HOA dispute. No, this was the kind of legal trouble that could ruin her life. I knew she'd be spending the night in jail, but the real fun started the next morning when the charges were officially filed. Vandalism, trespassing, property destruction. These were serious offenses, and given the scale of the damage, she wasn't getting off easy. See, most people don't realize this, but felony vandalism isn't just about the act itself. It's about the value of what was destroyed. And my pool, that wasn't just a cheap above-ground inflatable thing. It was a full in-ground pool, custom-built, worth tens of thousands of dollars. And the cement, that wasn't just an inconvenience. It had permanently destroyed the structure. In legal terms, Karen had caused malicious destruction of property exceeding $10,000. And you know what that meant? Felony charges. At this point, I decided to sit back and watch the system do its job. I didn't even have to push for charges. The evidence was so overwhelming that the state itself picked up the case. And when Karen finally got her day in court, well, let's just say reality hit her like a truck. I'll never forget that moment. Sitting in the back of the courtroom, watching as Karen, the same woman who had screamed at people over mailbox colors, stood before a judge, her once pristine appearance now a shadow of itself. The smugness, gone. The superiority, shattered. The prosecution didn't hold back. They laid out everything. The security footage showing her directing the cement truck onto my property. The time-stamped video evidence of the cement being poured. The witness testimonies from neighbors who saw her there. The paper trail proving that the HOA had no authority to demand pool removal. Karen tried to play the victim. She whined about how she was only doing what was best for the community and that she had no idea it would get her in trouble. She even tried to blame Bob, the guy she had roped into helping her. But guess what? Bob had already flipped on her. He had pleaded guilty almost immediately, throwing Karen under the bus in exchange for a lighter sentence. He testified that she had orchestrated everything, that she had been the one to call the cement company, that she had assured him they wouldn't get in trouble. And when that backfired, she tried to turn on him. Classic Karen. The judge wasn't buying it. Not for a second. "Miss Green," the judge said, staring her down, "you committed a felony. This isn't a simple HOA matter. This is criminal vandalism, trespassing, and destruction of private property. Do you understand that?" Karen stammered something about how she didn't mean for it to go this far, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Then came the sentencing. Now, felony vandalism carries some serious consequences. Depending on the state, Karen could have faced years in prison. But because this was her first criminal offense, and because she had no prior record, just a long history of being a terrible person, the judge gave her a deal. 2 years of probation, a $15,000 fine, mandatory community service, a permanent restraining order preventing her from contacting me or stepping foot on my property ever again. Oh, and the best part? She was officially banned from the HOA board. That's right. Karen, the woman who had built her entire identity around lording over the HOA, was now legally prohibited from being involved in any HOA leadership role ever again. It was over. The moment she walked out of that courtroom, she was no longer the queen of the neighborhood. No more ridiculous fines. No more petty rules. No more screaming at people for parking in the wrong spot. Karen was just another resident, or at least she would have been if she had stuck around, because the real final nail in the coffin came a few weeks later, when the HOA, now free from Karen's iron grip, voted to remove her as a member entirely. That's right, she wasn't just kicked off the board. She was kicked out of the HOA completely, and without the protection of her precious HOA title. Karen was now just another homeowner with a criminal record, a record that would follow her forever. And well, you can probably guess what happened next. One day, a for sale sign popped up in her yard, and just like that, she was gone. The neighborhood, it thrived without her. No more insane fines, no more power trips, no more late-night cement-related crimes, just peace. And as for me, I rebuilt my pool. Better than ever. And this time, I installed even more cameras. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that there's always another Karen out there. Karen had always been the type of person who thought she was untouchable. For years, she had ruled over the neighborhood like a self-appointed queen, issuing fines for the most ridiculous things. Mailboxes being slightly too tall, flowers that weren't in the approved color palette, driveways that had too many cars. But now, that power had been ripped away from her, and without it, she was nothing. It started small. At first, she tried to act like nothing had changed. She still walked around the neighborhood like she owned it, still scowled at anyone who dared to park on the street, still peered through her curtains like she was waiting for someone to break one of her precious HOA rules. But the problem was, no one cared anymore. See, when Karen had been on the HOA board, people had been afraid of her. She could find them. She could report them. She could make their lives miserable. But now she was just another homeowner. A homeowner with a criminal record. A homeowner who had poured cement into someone's pool and thought she'd get away with it. People started talking. At first, it was just whispers. Conversations that stopped when she walked by. Side eyes when she went to collect her mail. But then, the whispers turned into outright gossip. The entire neighborhood knew what she had done. And it didn't take long before everyone else did too. Her job found out. Now, I don't know exactly what Karen did for a living, but I do know that she worked at some kind of real estate office. And guess what? They didn't take too kindly to having an employee who had been arrested for felony vandalism. It didn't take long before a "Karen no longer works here" sign was posted on her LinkedIn profile. Her family found out. I don't know how they reacted, but if I had to guess, I'd say it probably wasn't great. People like Karen usually have one of two kinds of families. Either they enable their behavior, or they're completely embarrassed by it. Either way, she wasn't getting any sympathy. And then, the real blow came. Because while the legal system had already punished Karen, the neighborhood wasn't done yet. See, after Karen got kicked off the HOA board, the new leadership wasted no time cleaning up her mess. They started reversing some of the ridiculous fines she had issued. They changed the rules to make them more reasonable. And most importantly, they held a vote. A vote on whether or not Karen should be removed from the HOA entirely. Now, normally, kicking someone out of an HOA isn't easy. It requires a lot of votes, and most people don't want to get involved in that kind of drama. But Karen had made too many enemies. The vote passed overwhelmingly. Karen was officially removed, and that's when it really hit her. Because without her HOA backing her up, she was just another homeowner. A homeowner who now had a tarnished reputation and a criminal record. And then, the final humiliation came. The property values in the neighborhood started going up. Now, normally, you'd think that's a good thing, right? But for Karen, it was a nightmare. See, she had spent years lording over this place, making sure everything was just right to maintain her ridiculous standards. But now that she was out of power, the neighborhood was actually improving. People were happier. Houses were being renovated. New families were moving in. The HOA was working with the residents instead of against them. And the best part, everyone credited Karen's removal as the reason why. And that's when she finally snapped. One day, a for sale sign popped up in her yard. And then, just like that, she was gone. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't throw one last tantrum. She just packed up and left. And the neighborhood? It thrived without her. Karen was gone. Just like that. The person who had spent years making my life, and everyone else's, a living nightmare, had packed up and disappeared. But even after her departure, the damage she left behind still needed to be fixed. My pool, my property, and most importantly, the HOA itself. Everything needed to change. The first victory came almost immediately. With Karen gone and the HOA under new management, there was a sense of relief in the neighborhood that I hadn't felt in years. People actually smiled at each other again. Homeowners who had previously avoided attending HOA meetings showed up in record numbers, eager to finally have a say in the community they lived in. And the best part, they wanted change. The new HOA board wasted no time undoing the chaos Karen had caused. They started reviewing the ridiculous fines she had handed out over the years. People who had been forced to pay for things like unauthorized flower colors or incorrect mailbox placement were getting refunds. The rules were rewritten to be fair and reasonable, not designed to give one power-hungry person complete control. But my personal victory, that was something else entirely. The insurance process for my pool disaster had been a nightmare, but in the end, it worked in my favor. Since Karen had been found criminally responsible for the damage, Her homeowner's insurance refused to cover it. That meant the legal responsibility to pay for the repairs fell directly on her. She fought it, of course, filed every appeal she could, claimed she had been wrongfully accused and that I had somehow set her up. But the evidence was too strong, and the judge wasn't buying her excuses. She had to pay. And because the damage was extensive, we're talking about thousands of dollars in repair costs, she didn't just lose money, she lost her house. That's right, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, the woman who had tormented me for years over petty HOA rules, ended up losing the very home she had tried to control. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a deep sense of satisfaction when I saw the foreclosure notice go up on her old house. But that wasn't even the best part. The HOA, under its new leadership, decided that they wanted to do more than just fix the broken rules. They wanted to make things right. A few months after Karen was officially out of the picture, the HOA board invited me to a meeting. At first, I thought it was going to be some formal apology, a simple acknowledgement of what had happened. But when I walked into that room, they hit me with something completely unexpected. They offered me a seat on the board. At first, I laughed, thinking it was a joke. Me, on the HOA board, after everything I'd been through, but they were serious. They explained that after Karen's reign of terror, they wanted people who actually cared about the neighborhood, who wouldn't use the HOA as a tool for their own petty vendettas. And after everything I had fought against, I was the perfect person for the job, so I took it. And let me tell you, it was the most satisfying full-circle moment of my life. Under the new HOA, the community thrived. The ridiculous rules Karen had enforced were officially erased from the books. Instead of an HOA that spied on people and handed out pointless fines, it became what it was always meant to be, a group that helped maintain the neighborhood, not control it. And the best part? Karen was never allowed to step foot in the neighborhood again. Just when I thought everything was over, when I had finally moved past the nightmare that was Karen and her reign of HOA terror, something happened that sent chills down my spine. Because, let's be real, people like Karen don't just fade into the background. They don't accept defeat. No, they wait, they plot, and sometimes they strike back. It all started with a letter, a plain white envelope shoved into my mailbox with no return address. At first, I thought it was just junk mail, but when I tore it open, my heart stopped cold. It was a lawsuit. Karen was suing me. Apparently, she had spent months, even while losing her home, her position, and every last shred of power, cooking up a new scheme. The lawsuit claimed that I had defamed her and orchestrated a smear campaign to ruin her life. She was demanding thousands of dollars in damages, blaming me for everything, her financial loss, her public humiliation, even her eviction. It was insane. I took the letter straight to my lawyer, expecting him to laugh it off, but instead, he sighed, shook his head, and said, "Oh yeah, she's one of those people." Apparently, there's a name for people like Karen, those who can't stand losing and will file frivolous lawsuits just to get revenge. The good news? The court wasn't having it. With all the evidence stacked against her, including the fact that she had been convicted of a felony, her lawsuit was dismissed immediately. But here's where it gets really interesting. As we were leaving the courthouse, I spotted Karen sitting on a bench outside. She wasn't alone. A man in a cheap suit was talking to her, her lawyer, I assumed. But something about their body language seemed off. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but Karen looked furious. And then, suddenly, she stood up, threw her hands in the air, and stormed off. I didn't think much of it, just Karen being Karen, throwing a tantrum like she always did. But a few days later, I got a call from someone on the HOA board. They had some interesting news. Apparently, Karen's lawyer had dropped her. Why? Because not only had she lied about multiple details in her lawsuit, but she had tried to bribe him into falsifying evidence. She had gone so far as to create fake emails and fabricate messages to make it look like I had been running some kind of neighborhood conspiracy against her. But the lawyer, who despite his cheap suit, at least had some sense of morality, reported her to the bar association. Karen was now blacklisted. No lawyer in town would touch her case. And with that, she was finally, truly done. Or so I thought. Because a few weeks later, another strange letter showed up in my mailbox. This one wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't even addressed to me personally. It was a handwritten note. And as soon as I saw the handwriting, I knew exactly who it was from, Karen. It was short, just a few words, but it was creepy as hell. "You may have won this battle, but I will always be watching. Enjoy your precious pool while you can." And that was it. No signature, no return address, just a final warning from a woman who had lost everything, but still refused to let go. I showed it to my lawyer, to the HOA, even to the police. They all said the same thing. There wasn't much I could do. It wasn't a direct threat, just Karen being a bitter lunatic. They advised me to ignore it, to move on, so I did. Months passed, and nothing happened. No more letters, no more sightings of Karen, just silence. But to this day, every time I walk past my pool, a small part of me wonders, was that really the end? Or is Karen still out there, waiting for her next move? Because if there's one thing I've learned, people like Karen, they never truly go away. And just like that, Karen was finally out of my life, or so I thought. If you made it to the end of this wild story, you're exactly the kind of person I want to stick around. Crazy HOA stories, entitled people drama, and the most insane real-life tales. There's so much more to come. So do me a favor, hit that like button if you enjoyed the story. Subscribe if you want to hear more insane HOA and entitled people stories. And drop a comment below. Have you ever dealt with the nightmare neighbor like Karen? Let's talk about it.